think they're so sophisticated. The reality is, what we're experiencing now is a return of the primitives. We're not as smart as they were in the Byzantines, were we? Or are we?
No, not at all. You're absolutely right. See, not only was their currency stable and their society stable as a result for 700 years, but when they started devaluing the currency and allowing for inflation, that's when everything started to go wrong. Not only that, but the empire, we think of the Roman Empire. It's really the same thing as the Byzantine Empire. The whole western part of the Roman Empire fell because of mass unrestricted migration and non-assimilation of the migrants. Does that sound familiar to you at all?
I mean, that's all I kept thinking about when I was getting ready for this segment, because I didn't know we had you until I always look forward to you, and Honey Bunny knows it, but I didn't know we had you until this morning. And the reality is, without an understanding of this, without an intellectual philosophy to make things right, we are going to not only repeat terrible aspects of our history, but we're going to do it in a worse way when you see our technology in the form of killing each other. You know, when they did all this, it wasn't as sophisticated in killing each other as drone attacks and weapons of mass destruction. What you have now, it's easier to be dumber and cause more harm.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. We had in the Byzantine Empire an example of a country that held out against and stood fast against Islamic jihadis for 800 years. And one of the reasons they were able to do that was that they built a big wall around the capital city, Constantinople, and that was good enough to keep invaders out. Nowadays, of course, we're far more sophisticated. We just bring them in, invite them in, pay them tax money, and so we deserve what's coming. In terms of the fact that we have chosen this government, and this government is bringing this upon us. This is what the American people want, apparently.
Robert, one thing you learn when you grow up in a spicy neighborhood, there's a tremendous amount of phenomenal lessons if you're paying attention. And the main one to learn to have a decent quality of life is you cannot reason with the unreasonable, and to avoid them and stay away from them. And that's fine on an individual basis. But we have hundreds of millions of people, although a fraction of the religion of Islam. We have hundreds of millions of people that do not want peace. They do not want to coexist. We have the ideology of this religion, whether it's contorted to be evil or whether it's built to be superior to all. It seems to be a problem that we're not willing to fix because we're not willing to diagnose the problem. Yet you've spent a great deal of your life diagnosing the problem. So when you look at the current circumstance of the Holocaust too, when you realize how we're dealing with these people now and how they've managed to enrich themselves even greater as their hierarchy lives in Qatar, and the top three are worth $11 billion. There's no way to buy peace with people who want you dead, is there?
No, there's no way to do so, and this is yet another lesson. The Byzantines tried many times to make peace with the jihadis, the Ottoman Turks. They were unable to do so, or when they did so, they ended up giving away the store, giving away more than they had bargained for, and putting themselves in an even weaker position.
Robert, after September 11th, I kind of learned a little bit about Islam that I didn't know because I had the luxury of being an American. We didn't have to focus on the terrible aspects of the religion. But one thing that's always fascinated me about the religion, it's relatively new in the grand scheme of religions. It was, 662 years or 22 years after Christ lived, right, when they created this? And the guy who created it, he wasn't really somebody known for his peaceful ways, was he?
No. Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, is kind of singular among the founders of the major religions in being a warrior, in ordering his enemies to be killed, even poets who made fun of him in their verses. He had them assassinated and then rewarded the assassins. And this is the example that Muslims are told to follow, which of course doesn't mean that every Muslim follows that example, but he is held up as the highest model of human behavior.
And, I had the benefit of knowing more than a few, but one in particular became a friend of mine, and he was not a jihadi. He was not violent. We knew each other at work and we became friendly. He would talk to me about religion and try to convert me, as most religions do. I kept poking at this and saying, it's kind of relatively new. It's nothing to think that you have the answers of everything. And in fact, what can we learn if we know about how it was constructed and we know who constructed it? Isn't that the way we should look at our current problems to try to find a solution? And I keep coming to the same answer. You're really not going to find a solution, because what I can get from the argument is they just don't want anybody else to live.
Well, this is the problem, yeah. Like, you take, for example, the difficulty with the war with Israel, and the fact is this is a religious war, and that's the one aspect of it that's completely ignored by Western analysts and policymakers. But the basis of the fact that the jihadis have always refused to come to any agreement, and why every negotiated settlement, going back to Jimmy Carter and Camp David, has failed to bring peace, is because the Quran, the holy book of Islam, says drive them out from where they drove you out. And it's that simple.
And it also identifies everybody else as inferior. They call us infidels.
Yeah.
So it's okay to lie to an infidel. We're not equal.
Yeah, and it's a divine command that the Arabs have to drive the Israelis out. And yes, they're not to be treated as equals. In the Palestinian society they want to set up, there would be no Jews allowed to live, and any Christians who were there would be second-class citizens.
Yeah, not in Melrose Park, the neighborhood I grew up in. But anyway, in the meantime, what you have here is them invoking their religious superiority as they're murdering people. And that, to me, is something that we are so numb to that we don't talk about it. They yell Aloha snack bar, as I like to call it. But it's the way that they praise their made-up God. And the reality is, when you're dealing with people like this, there will be no peace as long as one of them is able to do this. So I'm curious to know what your position is. How do you view the future? Because it has to come to an end, or we're just going to keep going through this. And I'm, even though I look fantastic, I'm over 50, and it's been something that's been my whole life. So at what point do we recognize we're either going to deal with this or we're going to be victims of it?
Well, I don't know when that's ever going to happen, because it's as plain as day, and yet there's still no recognition of it on our scale. The fact is that the U.S. government keeps talking about a two-state solution and says that if there's a Palestinian state, then there will be peace. I guarantee you, Shaun, if there's a Palestinian state, there will not be peace. It'll only be used as a new base for new attacks against Israel.
Philosophically, they've adopted what American corrupt mafia members, who I refer to often as Democrats, they've adopted the victimization angle. So they're victims of colonialism. They're victims of the IDF, of Israel. They're victims of people who want to live in peace, and I still can't figure that out. But one thing you learn growing up in Chicago, it doesn't have to be fluid of thought. So now that you know this, and we've just suffered in the year 2023, the Holocaust Part 2, and you see the disregard for human life as they were killing babies. At this point, why would anyone in power in Israel ever want a solution where they get to remain in any position of power or remain as a threat?
Well, that's what Israel has said. Israel has said, we're going to destroy Hamas completely. And the biggest obstacle that they have to doing that is not anywhere in Israel or anywhere in Hamas. It's the United States government. It's Joe Biden and his people who insist that they have to stop, they have to have ceasefires, they have to make peace, and so on, which only guarantees that this is going to happen again.
Robert, it's an interesting climate as you pretend that you're from a place that has superior principles and righteous laws, and you pretend to be advanced and smart, and society is growing, and then something like this happens. And it's an undeniable fact that we are still in our intellectual infancy, but our ability to excuse insane actions by other human beings is the part that I find sickening. And today, the UN, the United Nations, which should, as far as I'm concerned, should be all arrested for financial fraud. But what they did is outrageous to me, and I'll tell you what it is. They had a meeting, and they came to Russia has to repeal their lack of LGBT, or they have to implement LGBTQ laws, and they have to repeal any law that does not recognize the LGBTQ community. Now, here's the thing I grew up in. I have dear friends of mine and family members who are homosexual. I have no ill will towards homosexuality. I don't care. I never did. That's your life, live it. I don't have to go, my opinion is mine for me to have. But when you see this movement that has changed the trajectory of law in America, and you see this become a foreign policy weapon, as if they don't like a country's actions, they will use it against Russia. But they're all very quiet when it comes to this ideology of fascism based in religion, and it runs all of these Middle Eastern countries. Do you find that hypocrisy something that even maybe somebody who might be in a Palestinian march to support the Palestinians, they might wake up and say, well, that doesn't seem right at all. There is no LGBTQ community in Hamas or in Gaza, nothing.
Yeah, you'd think, but it's amazing to me how these people seem to be able to believe contradictory things all at once. I mean, you have the Queers for Palestine out there marching, and do they realize that they'd be thrown off the tops of tall buildings if they actually went to Gaza? It's astonishing, the ability of these people to deceive themselves and to tell themselves lies about what they're dealing with, but they're actually fronting for a great evil that would victimize them if it had half a chance.
Robert, the idea that we can lure people with the quality of success, and when you look at what Israel has done in the same time period as what they call Palestine, and you look at the insane difference in the living caliber, the qualities of life, the progress of business. It's funny when you try to search what was the GDP of Palestine. They produced nothing. They have nothing. They lived on charity. The money, the billions of dollars that they were given from other countries in charity, they spent on weaponizing the terrorists, and they spent on infrastructure of what we now know is 300 miles of tunnels. And they use hospitals as fronts, apartment building as fronts. And I said flippantly in the beginning, what does a condo go for in Gaza? The fact is, there are no property rights in so-called Palestine, is there? You can't transact business or buy property. In fact, you all have to cooperate with the terrorists in order to live, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. What's wild about that, Joe Biden went over to Israel, pledged his support for their struggle, and right there, standing there with Netanyahu, he says, and I'm giving $100 million to Gaza. But see, your point is absolutely germane to this, that there isn't anybody in Gaza that Joe Biden could give it to other than Hamas. He was essentially announcing, by the way, I'm on your side, but I'm also going to give $100 million to your enemy.